That evening, when everything around seemed to freeze in serenity and silence, I, Olivia, felt with complete confidence that the universe was on my side. You know that feeling when everything around you fits together like a puzzle, and the world, it seems, is meant to be on your side. Tom, who was soon to become my husband, was one of those men whose actions seemed to defy the bustle of life. He walked the dog at 6 o'clock in the morning so I could sleep soundly, preserving our little ritual of peace. The two of us, it seemed, merged in a single breath, in one moment. Tom and I were at our favorite restaurant, Paradise, a place that had become a symbol of cozy dates and simple happiness for us. The flickering lights, the mysterious aroma of garlic in the air, everything was a sign that we were here, in our little world. An ordinary Tuesday, or perhaps a little more. I couldn't quite say, but it seemed to me that the day was special. Tom was telling me about his latest mishap at work, and as usual, I teased him. "Are you serious?" I laughed, thinking that I might actually spit out my wine from his story. He just smirked, as always, with that ease with which he took life's happenings. "If you make a scene, maybe they'll bring us a free dessert," he said, and I couldn't help but laugh. We were in our bubble, in our world, which felt so cozy, so perfect. But at some point, as it often happens, the world showed its narrowness. And then, out of nowhere, like a glowing little star, she appeared. Samantha. In her floral dress, she stood there, and all her energy seemed to fill the space. Radiating as if she had just won the lottery, she approached our table, and I felt my smile freeze. Tom nearly choked on his ravioli, and I struggled to keep my composure. "Oh, Samantha, what are you doing here?" I said, trying to hide my irritation and maintain friendliness. I looked at Tom, as if signaling him with an SOS. Samantha, as if not noticing the tense atmosphere, smiled and said, "I was just passing by and thought I'd stop in for a quick bite if you don't mind." She had already taken her purse off her shoulder, and in the next moment, she was ready to sit down. Tom, finally recovering, cleared his throat and said, "Well, this is our date, you know." Samantha waved her hand as if brushing away the thought that she might be disturbing our little world. "Oh, damn it," she said playfully, "I'll just sit for a minute. I've missed seeing you too." And just before we could figure out what was going on, she had already pulled up a chair, and the waiter was placing the third plate. A third chair. Our romantic evening continued, but it was as if everything had shifted slightly, not quite the same as before. "Olivia, darling, how's the wedding planning going?" she began, ignoring the restrained silence between us. "I hope you're considering peonies for the centerpieces. They are the best choice." I exchanged a glance with Tom, sighing heavily. Honestly, I was ready to throw it all out and tell her the truth, but something held me back. "We're thinking about lying," I said, trying to stay calm. She winced, as though I had suggested decorating the wedding with weeds. "Lies are so common, Olivia," Samantha said with barely perceptible irony. "But of course, it's your day." She then shifted to the next topic. "Tommy, did you tell her about my idea to spend our honeymoon in Alaska?" A spark lit in her eyes, and I knew she was ready to stir up a storm. "The cruise will be unforgettable," she added, and I could almost feel the storm approaching, struggling to hold back my emotions. Tom was clearly trying to figure out how to stop his mom from ruining our wedding, and now Samantha had become the new threat. It felt like we were sitting on sand, and she was already thinking about how to bypass us with yet another intervention. She pressed her lips together, but then, suddenly, her eyes lit up. "You know, I have the perfect solution," she said, with that same spark in her eyes that made everyone around her feel she had a plan. "You can always do both." I saw this wonderful, 2 for the price of 1 deal, and I realized we were about to go on a trip with Samantha. At first, I thought I had just missed how she had become an inseparable part of our wedding planning. She was like a living, breathing wedding planner and personal coach we never signed up for. But, hey, at least we got a free dessert, which, to me, seemed like the only gift from this dinner. The waiter seemed to pity us. I don't know what made him look at us that way, but that look definitely meant something. I thought wedding planning was like juggling cats, though I doubt anyone can truly convey what that's like. And if your fiancé's mom is Samantha, it's like those cats are starting to catch fire. At that moment, I was up to my neck in fabric samples and catering menus, each of which seemed to be the most important thing in the world. And then, there she was, with her enormous folder labeled Tommy's Wedding, which seemed both strange and absurd, because the last time I checked, I was the one supposed to marry Tom. That evening, Tom and I were sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by guest lists and table settings, when suddenly Samantha exploded. It was like a scene from a home makeover show. She burst into the room like a tornado and announced with the gravity of someone who had just uncovered the secret of the universe, "Olivia, darling, I figured it all out." With these words, she dropped her folder with a distinct thud onto the coffee table, as though emphasizing the significance of what she was about to say. I looked at Tom, who, in turn, looked at me with a meaningful, almost guilty expression, as if apologizing for what was happening. "I'm so sorry," his gaze spoke more than words could convey. Samantha sat down and began laying out her plan, which really looked like a seating chart. "You won't believe it, but I managed to seat everyone according to their astrological signs. It's going to be so unique," she beamed, obviously pleased with herself. Tom sighed and ran a hand through his hair as he said, "Mom is really inventive, but we had already worked on this, discussing the seating arrangements and preparing everything." Samantha's smile wavered slightly, but I quickly said, "We really appreciate your help, Samantha, but we have this covered on the right." Tom nodded, squeezing my hand under the table as if confirming my words. "Yes, Mom has great ideas, and we're really happy with them." Samantha was not used to resistance, and her face immediately changed. She sniffed, flipping through the folder as if it contained the entire world. "All right, but what about the invitations? Please tell me you're still not considering that awful calligraphy. It's practically unreadable," she said, as if criticism was her natural state. Tom glanced at me, and I immediately realized that this was his breaking point. "Actually, we both like the calligraphy," I said, trying to calm the situation. But Samantha's eyes could have started a small kitchen fire, so fiercely did she glare at me. However, as if by magic, she transformed again. The switch flipped, and there she was, once more bathed in sunlight and rainbows, ready to pretend nothing had happened. "Well, it's your day," she said with such a sincere smile that I could barely believe that there wasn't an entire plan unfolding in her head. But her discontent was still obvious. The next obstacle was Grandma Ruth. The sweet old lady who loved crosswords and made terrible roast dinners, but for Samantha, she had become a real problem. She wanted to exclude Grandma Ruth from the guest list, explaining that she would cause drama. "Olivia, it's better for everyone," she said, as if it were absolutely logical. But Tom drew the line. "No, Mom, Grandma Ruth is coming, she's my grandmother, and that's non-negotiable." Samantha's lips tightened into a straight line. "Tommy, I thought you wanted a peaceful, perfect wedding." Her voice turned cold. "I'm arranging your mom and Olivia and Grandma Ruth, and that's the end of the story." The battle lines had been drawn, but we stood our ground. Samantha retreated on that front, but I could feel that this was only the first round. There were still about 100 to go. And no matter how hard I tried to stay calm, it was clear that long battles lay ahead, sometimes unseen, but constantly looming. The big day of choosing the wedding dress, which was supposed to be one of those magical moments for a bride, remained so for me until Samantha, my future mother-in-law, turned it into a battleground of beads and lace. I had fallen in love with a simple, elegant dress, but for Samantha, that was not enough. She insisted it had to look like something fit for a royal wedding, if that wedding had taken place in 1985. The dress I had chosen had to be bigger, brighter, truly spectacular. To meet her demands, it took every ounce of my patience and some help from my friends, who diplomatically helped me turn down Samantha's generous offer. "You really should try something with a bit more sparkle," Samantha insisted, nudging me toward the monstrosity covered in glitter that seemed about to carry me off to the heavens. But I was relieved to see the concerned wrinkle on Tom's face. He was clearly not thrilled. I tried to speak calmly, holding the dress that Jenny had found for me. It felt right, light, alive, just as I had imagined it. "It feels right," I said, almost as if I were trying to defend my decision. Samantha scoffed, pressing her lips into a thin line, and responded sharply, "All right, but don't come crying to me when you look back at your wedding photos and realize you look like every other bride." She clearly thought she was the only one who knew what a perfect wedding should look like, and that her opinion on how a bride should look was the only right one. Her gaze had already lost its sincerity, but she continued, "The hairstyles weren't any simpler either. My idea of a free-flowing, effortless style is obviously too laid-back for you." She simply couldn't understand that for me, this was a wedding, not an opportunity to stage a fashion show. I imagined a bride who couldn't even get out of bed from the weight of corsets and tight hairstyles. Meanwhile, Samantha, apparently working from some unknown wedding hairstyle manual, seemed to believe there was only one rule: it should be something that can pick up satellite signals. I felt the tension rise as she insisted that this one would make a statement. The stylist, surely accustomed to her pressure, was pinning my hair up, almost to my shoulders, and I caught her gaze in the mirror. She shook her head apologetically, and I knew this dance with Samantha was not a new one for her. "I really appreciate your input," I said, trying to detach myself from it all as the final architectural masterpiece was being built on my head in the form of yet another suggestion. "But I think I'll stick with the original style I had in mind." I noticed how Samantha suppressed her displeasure, though her face still reflected her disappointment. Thankfully, she let it go, for the moment. And then the wedding day arrived. It was the day I truly felt light. A breath in, a breath out, and I was walking down the aisle, feeling like I was literally on wings. Despite all of Samantha's displeasure and her puffed-up face, this day was ours. And no matter how much she tried to make last-minute changes, Tom and I stood firm in our decisions. We stood together, confident that we wouldn't let others' desires alter our reality. The wedding was beautiful, despite her gloomy looks. During the reception, it seemed like Samantha spent the whole evening throwing side glances at Tom, and Grandma, almost on purpose, teased her. "You look like you're sucking on lemons, Samantha." "Relax, it's a party," she said with a smile, clinking glasses with mine. Samantha shot her a look that could have curdled milk, but Grandma didn't mind, continuing on. "I just want everything to be perfect," she muttered. Grandma, in turn, patted her hand with feigned sympathy. "Oh, dear, the day is beautiful because they're happy. Look at them." And she was right. Tom and I were happy, despite everything. And not even my mother-in-law's sour face could change the fact that this day was truly ours. A few days after the wedding, when it seemed like everything had returned to its usual rhythm, those quiet days, full of harmony and peace, were a true gift. Tom and I, having just found peace and calm after the wedding, were settling into our new life together. On that lazy Sunday morning, sitting in the kitchen and unpacking wedding gifts, we happily admired every card written by our loved ones. Small joys like these created a sense of stability and comfort, but I knew deep down that this was just the predicted silence before the storm. Because Samantha, as always, wasn't going to let us off that easily. She came without warning. I could feel it from a mile away, her face, with that expression that said, "I have something big to share." Her visits often began like this. She would storm into the room like a hurricane, filling up the space and leaving behind mixed feelings. Tom and I exchanged a glance as she made herself at home on our couch, not waiting for an invitation. I tried to hide my exhaustion, but inside, something stirred uneasily. "Olivia, Tom," she began, ignoring our silent looks, "I can't bear the thought of being away from you two for so long, especially when you're going on your honeymoon." I froze, feeling the tension rise. Samantha couldn't just leave us in peace. Tom and I exchanged another glance. We were only going away for 2 weeks, I thought. It wasn't such a big loss. "We're only going for 2 weeks, Mom," he said, but his voice betrayed obvious confusion. It seemed even he hadn't expected this. Samantha continued, disregarding his words, her hands clenched together as if she were about to announce something truly important. Her eyes lit up, and her voice became more serious. "I've decided to join you. It's going to be so much fun." The room grew so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. I couldn't believe my ears. How could she even think we'd agree to something like this? Join us on our honeymoon? My voice was filled with disbelief and irritation, trying to take control. "Are you serious?" Samantha, as always, was relentless. She beamed as though it were completely natural, as though we would all agree sooner or later. Her words about the delightful place she found, right next to us, sounded like a dream, but her dreams had nothing to do with ours. "I hardly recognize this place," she said with genuine excitement, as if it were something magical. Tom finally found his voice. He looked confused, but his words were confident. "Mom, a honeymoon is a time for couples to be alone. You understand, right?" Samantha turned to me with wide eyes, her gaze full of genuine bewilderment, and a faint shadow of guilt appeared on her face, as though I were making her feel guilty about something. I couldn't understand how she could be so intrusive, but her expression still made me feel a stab of doubt. "I just thought I could help make it special." "You won't even notice I'm there," she said, her voice soft, but there was an undertone that made it clear she wasn't going to back down so easily. I tried to be firm, but gentle in my response. "Samantha, the honeymoon is actually meant for the couple. We need time to be alone," I said, feeling my voice grow firmer, but still trying to be as gentle as possible. She looked at us in turn, her gaze shifting between us, and her expression began to crack. I felt a pang of something like guilt, but I suppressed it. This was our time, and no one should take it from us. "Oh, fine," she said, her voice full of disappointment. I could have sworn there was almost a theatrical reproach hidden in her words, and I knew the scene was just the beginning. I knew it wasn't over. Samantha had a plan, and, as always, she wasn't going to stop at this. Tom squeezed my hand tightly under the table, his gaze determined. We were both silent, but I knew he was silently swearing that we would face any storm Samantha threw our way, together. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread after the surprise Samantha had planned for our honeymoon. Tom and I had hoped for some peace, some time alone to strengthen our bond and enjoy the quiet. But it was clear that wasn't going to happen. This game could be played by two, and Samantha, as an experienced player, had already shown that she wasn't going to surrender her position. I felt the pressure building in my chest. We decided to act. I thought that the next day, I'd call Tom's grandmother Ruth. If anyone could outsmart Samantha, it was her. When I dialed the number, Ruth's voice, as always, was warm, but with a hint of caution. The crackle of the old phone almost drowned out her words. "Hello, Ruth, it's Olivia," I started. "I need some advice. Or maybe, something like a partner in crime." There was a pause, then a laugh. "What has she done now?" I explained the situation as best as I could, telling her how Samantha insisted on joining our honeymoon. I already had a plan in mind. We needed to make her believe her presence wouldn't be unwelcome. I suggested Ruth come with us, so it would look like a family affair that Samantha wouldn't dare to attend if she knew Grandma would be there. Ruth laughed, her laughter loud and clear like spring rain. "Oh, Olivia, that's devious. I love it," she said, and I felt a wave of relief. After all, who better than Ruth to come up with a plan to outsmart Samantha? We agreed that she would come, and as I hung up, I felt lighter. Tom walked in just as I put the phone down, and his look immediately became knowing. "Why do I get the feeling you've come up with something?" he said, raising an eyebrow. I smiled, realizing he had definitely noticed I was scheming. "I talked to Ruth," I replied. "She's coming on the family honeymoon. I think that'll make Samantha back off." Tom looked at me with a slightly stunned expression, but then his face cleared. "You think it'll work?" "It has to work," I said, although I knew we couldn't be sure of the outcome. Our conversation had been more of a formality. We hadn't told Samantha about our surprise. After all, she wasn't the only one who could pull a surprise. The next day, we sat on the couch, trying not to smile like kids with a secret. When Samantha arrived, she studied us carefully but said nothing. Tom and I barely managed to hold back a wink, but Samantha didn't notice. She continued to admire the idea of a three-person honeymoon, offering a ton of crazy ideas meant to uplift the mood. And at some point, when she finally left, promising to come back, Tom let out a long whistle. "I think she'll change her mind," he said, smiling as I set the table for dinner. At that moment, I hoped she would actually change her mind. But, unfortunately, the hope for that was slim. We laughed, but the tension didn't dissipate, although at least, for the time being, we had a slight advantage in this battle. At the ski resort, which would have seemed like something straight out of a romantic movie if it weren't for Samantha, who clung to us like glue, the atmosphere was far from dreamy. Personal space was as foreign a concept to her as subtlety. Wherever Tom and I went, she was always right behind us. We couldn't even hope for any privacy. One night, in fact, quite late, she knocked on our door, explaining that she had missed us so much. "Yeah, because you haven't seen us for 2 hours," she said, as though that was an eternity. The next morning, Samantha asked Tom to help her pick out skis, which took most of the afternoon. In the end, we only had time to have dinner, and exhausted by her endless chatter, we fell asleep immediately, barely able to experience the world we had dreamed of. This was not the honeymoon I had imagined. Our honeymoon slowly started to feel more like a group outing, and every chance for romance quickly got buried in the snow. Tom and I tried to find some privacy, but all our efforts couldn't hold back the overwhelming energy that was building around us. But everything changed the moment Ruth, Tom's grandmother, arrived. We were just finishing breakfast and her unexpected appearance exploded into our quiet corner. Ruth entered the room with the energy that was so typical of her. There was something lively and determined in her voice as she broke the uncomfortable silence that had settled between Tom, Samantha, and me. Samantha's fork clattered onto the plate, and I saw her face change in an instant. "Ruth, what the hell are you doing here?" Samantha blurted out, her tone both confused and, to some degree, frightened. It was clear in her eyes. Ruth, as always, was fearless. She smiled brightly, flinging off her gloves as if she had just returned from a victorious campaign. I thought I'd take advantage of the family trip idea. This place is just wonderful, she said, her eyes sparkling with mischievous delight, as always when she was in her element. I saw Samantha's face change from confusion to horror. It was clear she hadn't expected such a turn of events. She even said in a slightly trembling voice, "But you can't stand the cold, Ruth." Ruth smiled in reply. "Oh, I find the cold quite refreshing. And besides, it's been many years since I last skied," she said. Her words were so simple and confident that even Samantha, despite her confusion, could respond with nothing more than a silent look. Ruth sat down and continued the conversation, her voice, as always, full of life and wit. Tom squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt his face light up with joy. It was that unexpected Ellie who arrived just in time, filling the space with her energy. Samantha, meanwhile, was unusually quiet, even with her usual enthusiasm that always accompanied every moment of the day. She stopped intervening, fading into the background, and I began to feel that her energy had somewhat dissipated. I leaned toward Ruth and whispered, "I can't thank you enough for coming." Ruth, as always, gently patted my hand, her gaze full of care and understanding. At some point, everyone stood up from the table, and Samantha, slowing her step, clearly felt the tension in the air rise. The contrast to her earlier eagerness about Ruth's arrival was obvious. The tension, which had been building like an impending avalanche, seemed to ease. The honeymoon, it seemed, had returned to the right course, or at least, that's how it felt in this hopeful moment. In the following days, Ruth and I established a new routine. The mornings were for skiing, afternoons were spent cozying up by the fireplace, and evenings turned into real events when the true show began. And then one night, when we were all gathered in the living room after dinner, the tension once again reached its peak. Ruth, like a grandmother should, relentlessly pushed all of Samantha's buttons, masking it with kind words and concern, but each of her phrases was like a sharp jab. Samantha, in her desperate attempts to maintain an air of politeness, seemed like a simmering pot on the verge of boiling over. We all sat in the living room, discussing various topics, when I noticed Samantha's smile twitching every time Ruth told another story about Tom's childhood mischief. "Oh, Samantha, you would have laughed if you had seen Tom as little Tyke, always daydreaming," Ruth said, her eyes sparkling with mischievous light. Samantha gripped her teacup tighter, her lips pulling into a strained smile. "Yes, Ruth's kids are quite a handful, aren't they?" she said, forcing herself to laugh. But there was still a note of irritation in her voice. Each word Ruth spoke, each movement of hers, seemed to intensify the tension in the room, but despite that, her presence, in some way, was the key that started to open new doors in our honeymoon. At that moment, it became clear that the battle wasn't over, but at least for the time being, Ruth had managed to balance the tension that Samantha had created. Ruth's next words were like a velvet glove with an iron fist, something incredibly soft yet possessing an undeniable strength. They came with such persistence that it felt as though the room itself had held its breath, and each word seemed to penetrate us, leaving no room to retreat. "They certainly can be, but the real task is knowing when to let them be themselves," she said, her voice light and casual, yet imbued with a depth of thought, as if every syllable had been carefully measured with precision and care. At that moment, Samantha's cup clinked against the saucer, the sound sharp as thunder, breaking the silence. I noticed how Samantha began to speak, her voice strained, the forced calmness fooling no one who knew her well, especially when it came to her own son. I didn't need to look to understand. This was a game, one in which she was uncomfortable being honest, and every word she uttered wriggled, attempting to conceal what she truly felt. Tom's hand found mine under the table, a silent plea for help. I squeezed it, gathering strength. It was a moment when I realized we were all playing this game. Ruth leaned forward, her voice becoming soft but still heavy with meaning. "What about when this son of yours becomes a grown man?" Her words seemed to open windows in a dark room, letting in fresh air. The living room fell incredibly silent. All eyes were fixed on us, and it felt like the breath in the room had stopped. Samantha stood abruptly, and her chair scraped loudly against the floor, shattering the heavy moment. She glanced at us, her face contorting with outrage. "A mother's work never ends," she declared, her voice rising to a crescendo of disappointment, almost hysteria. Ruth, seemingly unfazed, simply looked at her, without the slightest hint of worry on her face. "If you say so, dear," she replied, her words a soft, inevitable reminder that standing your ground was not something to fear. Samantha couldn't hold it in any longer, and her fury burst forth like a floodgate opening. The echo of her outrage bounced off the walls, tearing through the space. The moment was so sharp it felt like a broken ski pole had sliced through the silence, and in the next instant, the room erupted in muffled laughter and snickers. I felt the tension in the air dissipate, as if everything had suddenly become less important. Tom's grandmother simply shook her head, laughing along with the crowd, her eyes sparkling as if she were savoring every moment of the spectacle. The rest of the evening passed in a series of jokes, whispers, and knowing glances, as if everyone had become participants in an endless absurdist theater. Even Tom and I couldn't help but exhale, at one point feeling how the humor was helping us relax. The mockery, the restrained laughter, and the absurdity of what was happening finally reached Samantha. We all noticed how her face, initially as hard as stone, slowly softened when she realized she had gone from being the puppeteer to the puppet. And at that moment, it no longer seemed so important. The entire resort had become a witness to this spectacle, sitting in the front row like spectators waiting for the climax. When the evening finally came to an end and we headed to bed, Tom hugged me. His voice was filled with relief, but also gratitude. "I have to hand it to Grandma. She really knows how to put on a show." I leaned toward him, and a smile spread across my face. I felt the tension finally begin to ease, and a real sense of relief appeared on our faces. Who would have known our honeymoon would include live music? I replied, smiling, breathing in the moment when all the chaos finally started to turn into something much more amusing and lighthearted. When the door closed behind us, the muffled sounds of still laughing guests assured us that this evening would be woven into the resort's history, becoming a legendary battle of wills set against the snowy backdrop. The silence that greeted us at home felt alien after all the noise from the resort. It was strange, but I found myself half missing the drama, while at the same time feeling a strange sense of relief from the quiet that enveloped our home. It was a lazy Sunday morning, when everything seemed cozy and unhurried, and then the phone rang, breaking the calm. I looked at Tom, who shrugged and remained silent. "Don't answer it," he said, but something pushed me to pick it up. A quiet voice inside me suggested that this call was different, important. I carefully picked up the phone, and when I said, "Hello," the voice on the other end was trembling, as if its owner were trying to hold it together. "Hello, this is Samantha," she said, and I felt the reflex tighten, a wave of tension taking hold of me. Tom immediately looked at me, his eyes filled with concern, and I noticed how his hand reached for the phone, but I waved him off. This was one conversation I needed to finish on my own. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to remain firm, even though a sense of doubt was bubbling inside me. "Hello, Samantha," I said, feeling the words struggle to come out. There was a deep breath on the other end of the line, and it seemed she was about to continue, but the words got caught in her throat. I blinked, stunned by what I was hearing, and fell silent. Unknowingly, I felt myself becoming authoritative, like Ruth at the resort, fully confident that I could handle this conversation. Samantha continued, her voice tense and sincere. I wanted to apologize. Her words seemed reluctant to break free, like ice slowly melting in the warmth of her words. I could feel her trying to be strong, but her voice trembled. I stood there, not knowing what to do. Tom was next to me, his hand reaching for the phone, but I waved him off. I knew this was the moment when I had to be strong, despite the emotions raging inside me. Samantha continued, her words full of regret, and they seemed sincere, as if a layer of ice had finally melted. I know I've hurt you, and I can't change what I've done, she continued, but I'll try to be better. For you, for Tom, for us. Her sincerity struck me. I took a step toward forgiveness, feeling something shift, as if everything we had been through started to fade in this simple, heartfelt moment. We appreciate you saying that, Samantha, I replied, and my voice carried a gratitude I hadn't expected. On the other end of the line, there was a sniffle, and then, "Thank you for understanding." When I hung up, Tom looked at me in surprise. I noticed how awe and relief mixed in his gaze, and it was clear this was important to him too. "I think that's why she sounded different," he said, embracing me. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past begin to lift, like the tension I had been carrying was dissolving, and something brighter was emerging on the horizon. "We're giving her a chance," I said, smiling uncertainly, and enjoying our peace. Tom smiled in response, and his eyes filled with lightness, as if the burden we had carried for so long had suddenly become easier. "Yes, I can definitely get used to this silence," he replied, and I felt him hold me tighter, as though affirming this moment where the world suddenly seemed a little simpler. The future suddenly seemed a little brighter, a little more open. Maybe, just maybe, we had all come out on the other side of this mess as a real family. And in that moment, I believed it was possible.